You're going to leave me here, aren't you? The woman's voice came out cracked, barely above a whisper, soaked in rain and blood, and something that sounded a lot like resignation, like she already knew the answer. Emma Collins stood in the dark, heart slamming against her ribs, staring at a stranger she had every reason to walk away from. She had nothing, no home, no family, no reason to stay, but she knelt down anyway. That single moment, that one choice made by a girl nobody saw, was about to change both of their lives forever. Before we go any further, if this story moves you, please subscribe to this channel and follow along until the very end. And drop a comment telling me what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The night Emma Collins almost walked past the most important moment of her life, she was thinking about Soup. Not love, not destiny, not second chances. Soup. Specifically, she was thinking about whether the St. Augustine shelter on Fifth Avenue would still have a pot going by the time she crossed downtown, or whether she'd be sleeping on an empty stomach again. She'd been calculating the odds with the kind of grim precision that only comes from doing it 1,000 times before. 3 miles in the rain. Maybe 40 minutes if she pushed it. The shelter closed at 10. Her watch, a cracked Casio she'd found in a dumpster outside a pawn shop, read 9:14. She could make it. She had learned to live inside those small calculations. Not dreams, not plans, just, can I make it? And if the answer was yes, she moved. If the answer was no, she adapted. That was Emma Collins at 20 years old. Not bitter, not broken, just precise, just quiet, just invisible. She liked it that way. Invisible meant safe. Invisible meant nobody looked at you long enough to decide you were a problem. She had her hood pulled low, her backpack strapped tight against both shoulders. A habit she'd developed after someone tried to rip it off her back outside a bus station in Tacoma 2 winters ago. She kept to the edge of the sidewalk, close to the buildings where the awnings gave a few inches of shelter from the rain. Her shoes were soaked through. They'd been soaked through for 3 days. She'd stopped noticing. The street she was cutting through wasn't a street she normally used. She'd taken a detour to avoid a group of men she'd seen loitering near the underpass on Madison. And the detour had pushed her 2 blocks east onto Clement, a narrow corridor of old warehouses and chain-link fences that most people avoided after dark. Emma didn't love it, but she'd learned that the places most people avoided were often exactly the places where a girl alone could move without being noticed. She was halfway down the block when she heard it. Not a crash, though the crash had already happened. What she heard first was the silence after the crash. That particular horrible quality of silence that follows a violent sound when the world seems to hold its breath and wait to see if anything survived. Then she heard the engine, still running, somewhere nearby, low and grinding like something mechanical struggling against itself. Emma stopped walking. She told herself to keep moving. She ran the calculation. Soup, shelter, 10 o'clock, 3 miles. She didn't have time for complications. She never had time for complications. Complications got you noticed. Complications got you involved. Complications had a way of becoming your problem even when they started out as someone else's. She took 2 more steps. Then she heard the voice. Hey, it was barely audible. Rough and wet, like the word had to push through something to get out. Like it cost something. Emma stopped again. Hey, is somebody there? She closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. 1 second of just standing in the rain, listening to the engine grind and the rain hit the pavement and a stranger asked if anybody was there. Then she turned around. The motorcycle was on its side in the narrow alley between 2 warehouses, about 30 feet off the street. It was a massive machine, a Harley-Davidson Road King, though Emma wouldn't have known that, heavy and gleaming even in the dark, even tipped over in the rain with its engine still trying to turn over like a dying animal refusing to quit. The front wheel was twisted at a wrong angle. The handlebars had dug a gouge into the asphalt. The woman was pinned beneath it, not fully, not the way that meant she was already gone, but enough. The rear frame of the motorcycle had come down across her left leg, and she was on her back in the alley, her right arm braced against the ground, trying with everything she had to push the machine off herself. She wasn't making progress. Emma stood at the edge of the alley and stared. The woman was older, maybe late 50s. Hard to tell in the dark and the rain. She was wearing a leather jacket covered in patches that Emma couldn't read from this distance, and heavy boots, and she was soaking wet, and there was blood on her face from somewhere above her left eyebrow. Not gushing, but steady. The kind of steady that didn't look like it was planning to stop on its own. Their eyes met. The woman didn't ask for help again. She just looked at Emma, and there was something in that look. Not fear, not quite. More like assessment. The same quiet calculation Emma had been running her whole life. Who are you? What are you going to do? Are you going to be a problem or a solution? Can you walk? Emma heard herself say. The woman actually laughed at that. A short, sharp sound, more reflex than humor. If I could walk, I'd have walked. Emma stepped into the alley. Soon. She didn't think about the leather jacket or the patches. She didn't think about the motorcycle or what kind of person rode one alone through Seattle on a stormy Tuesday night. She thought about the weight of the machine and the angle of the woman's leg, and whether the frame had done structural damage or whether it was just pressure. She'd picked up fragments of medical knowledge the way you pick up everything when you're homeless, from overheard conversations in waiting rooms, from pamphlets left out at shelters, from a paramedic named Gerald who used to hand out granola bars outside the downtown library and had, over the course of 2 winters, explained to Emma more about emergency first response than most people learn in their lives. Gerald had told her once, the worst thing you can do for a crush injury is yank the pressure off fast. You got to be controlled. Emma crouched down beside the motorcycle and put her hands on the frame. I'm going to try to lift this, she said. When I do, don't jerk your leg. Slide it. Slow. I know how to handle pain, the woman said flatly. I'm sure you do. Slide slow anyway. The woman looked at her for a moment. Then, what's your name? Emma blinked. It was such a strange question to ask right now. Emma. Victoria, the woman said, like it was an introduction at a dinner party, like they weren't sitting in a flooded alley with several hundred pounds of motorcycle between them. Okay, Victoria, Emma said. Ready? Do it. The motorcycle was heavier than anything Emma had ever tried to move. She got her hands under the rear frame, dug her heels into the wet asphalt, and pushed with everything in her body. Her back screamed, her arms shook. The rain made everything slippery, and her shoes had no grip, and she could feel herself starting to slide. She didn't stop. She pushed harder. The bike shifted at 2 inches, maybe 3, and Victoria moved with a sharp intake of breath that she immediately suppressed, and Emma held the weight for just long enough, muscles burning, and then the frame came down again. But Victoria had pulled her leg clear, and Emma let go and dropped to one knee, breathing hard, hands braced on her thighs. 3 seconds of silence. Okay, Victoria said, and her voice was different now. Something in it had shifted. Okay. Emma looked up. Victoria was sitting up straighter, probing her leg with careful fingers. Her face was tight with pain, but controlled, composed. The blood from her forehead was tracking down the left side of her face in a thin line. Your head, Emma said. I know. It needs pressure. I know that too. Emma didn't argue. She pulled off her jacket, the only jacket she owned, a second-hand Army surplus field coat she'd been wearing for 2 years, patched in 3 places, still holding together, still doing its job, and she balled up the cleanest section of the lining and pressed it against Victoria's forehead. Victoria's hand came up immediately, instinctively, pressing over Emma's. Their eyes met again, this time from about 8 inches apart. You're not going to run, Victoria said. Not a question. No, Emma said. Why not? Emma didn't have a clean answer for that. She'd been asking herself the same thing since she stepped into the alley. She said the only true thing she could find. I don't know. Victoria studied her face for a long moment, rain falling between them, the motorcycle engine still grinding faintly behind them like a heartbeat that didn't know it was supposed to stop. What are you doing out here tonight? Victoria asked. Walking to a shelter. Victoria's eyes moved briefly to the backpack still strapped to Emma's back, to the soaked clothes, to the worn-out shoes. She didn't say anything for a moment. You're homeless, she said, not cruel, not pitying, just accurate. Yes. And you stopped anyway. Yes. Victoria didn't say anything else for a moment. Then she reached up with her free hand and pressed Emma's hand more firmly against the wound on her forehead. like she was trying to communicate something through the pressure. Hold that, don't let go. I'm not going anywhere, Emma said. I know, Victoria said quietly. I can tell. The ambulance took 11 minutes. Emma knew because she counted. She counted the way she counted everything. Minutes to shelter closing time, calories in a shelter dinner, blocks between safe sleeping spots. She counted to stay calm. She counted because numbers didn't lie the way feelings could. While they waited, Victoria talked. Not about the crash. She was vague about that, in a way Emma didn't push on. She'd been riding back from somewhere, taken a turn too fast on wet pavement, gone down. Simple physics. Bad luck. It happened. She talked about other things instead. She asked Emma how long she'd been on the streets. Emma said almost 4 years since she was 16, since the foster placement that was supposed to be her last chance at stability had ended the way most of them ended. Not violently, just quietly. A family that decided they weren't ready, and a system that nodded and moved her name to a different list and eventually lost track of it altogether. Victoria listened without flinching. She asked if Emma had people. Emma said no. Victoria asked if she wanted them. Emma was quiet for a moment because that was a harder question. And then she said, I stopped wanting things that weren't going to happen. Victoria said, that's a very old thing to say for a 20-year-old. Emma said, I've had a lot of practice. And Victoria looked at her, really looked at her, with the kind of attention that Emma hadn't experienced from another adult in years. The kind of attention that felt like being seen rather than assessed for risk. And she said, you know something, Emma? You are not nobody. The words landed somewhere deep. Emma didn't respond. She didn't know how. She just kept the pressure on the wound and counted the minutes and told herself the words didn't matter. That they were just something people said, that Victoria was probably in shock and wouldn't even remember saying it in the morning. But the words stayed. They stayed in a place in her chest that she thought was empty. When the ambulance pulled into the alley, 2 paramedics jumped out and moved toward Victoria with the focused urgency of people who knew their job. Emma stepped back. Automatically, instinctively, the way she always stepped back when official people arrived. Paramedics meant questions. Questions meant attention. Attention meant paperwork and judgment, and people deciding what to do with you. She'd learned a long time ago that the best thing a homeless girl could do when the lights and uniforms showed up was make herself small and then make herself absent. She was already at the edge of the alley when one of the paramedics turned and looked at her. Hey, are you with her? Emma hesitated. Did you call this in? She had from a payphone half a block away. There were still 2 in this neighborhood, relics. She knew where they all were, but she hadn't given her name. Is she going to be okay? Emma asked. We've got her, the paramedic said, which wasn't quite an answer. Emma nodded once as she turned. She walked out of the alley and back onto the street and pulled her jacket tighter, and then remembered she didn't have her jacket anymore. She'd left it pressed against a stranger's forehead, and the cold hit her all at once. The rain, the wind, the absence of the one layer that had been keeping her functional. She walked faster. She didn't look back. She didn't make it to the shelter. By the time she crossed downtown, it was 10:23, and the doors were locked. And the kind-faced woman who sometimes lingered by the entrance to let in latecomers wasn't there tonight. Emma stood outside for a few minutes, rain coming down harder now. No jacket, the cold starting to really bite. Then she did what she always did. She adapted. She knew 3 covered spots within 8 blocks. The best was the loading dock behind a restaurant supply company on Briggs, deep enough to block the wind, rarely bothered by anyone until the 5 a.m. delivery. She made her way there, crawled into the corner, where 2 walls met at the tightest angle, pulled her knees to her chest, wrapped her arms around her backpack, and closed her eyes. She thought about Victoria's voice. You are not nobody. She thought about the motorcycle engine grinding in the rain, trying to keep going even after the crash, even when it should have stopped. She thought about soup. She fell asleep. She didn't know that 30 minutes later, in a hospital room across town, Victoria Hayes was awake and refusing sedation and telling a worried nurse that she needed her phone right now because there was someone she needed to find. She didn't know that the nurse, after the 3rd request, finally handed it over. She didn't know that Victoria, with a bandage above her left eye and a splinted leg and an IV in her right arm, scrolled to a contact labeled Stone and hit call. She didn't know what Victoria said when he answered. She didn't know the weight of the conversation that followed. The words exchanged between two people who had known each other for decades, who had built something together that most people from the outside would never understand. But if she had known, this is what she would have heard Victoria say. I need you to find someone for me. A girl, 20, blonde, homeless, was near the Clement Street warehouses tonight. She stopped. Michael, she didn't have to, and she stopped. She gave me her jacket. A pause. I don't care what it takes. I want to find her. And this is what she would have heard Stone say, after a long silence on the other end of the line. Consider it done. Emma slept on the loading dock behind the restaurant supply company on Briggs Street, with no jacket and damp clothes and her backpack as a pillow. She slept the way she always slept, lightly, with one part of her brain always listening, always ready to move. She didn't dream about the crash. She didn't dream about Victoria or the motorcycle or the blood or the words that had lodged themselves somewhere she didn't have a name for. She dreamed about a kitchen, warm, the smell of something on the stove, a table with chairs around it, people passing food back and forth, talking, laughing, not looking at the door, like they expected something bad to come through it. She dreamed about belonging somewhere. She woke up at 4:57, 3 minutes before the delivery trucks usually came, and she gathered her things and she moved on, because that's what you did when you were Emma Collins. You moved on. You kept your head down. You stayed invisible. She had no way of knowing that invisible was no longer an option, because across this city, engines were starting. Leather jackets were being pulled on. A name was being passed from phone to phone through a network of people who did not give up easily and did not forget debts. She had no way of knowing that the search had already begun, and that the girl who had spent 4 years making herself impossible to see was about to be found. Emma spent the next 3 days not thinking about Victoria Hayes. She was good at not thinking about things. It was a skill she had developed the same way she had developed all her survival skills, through necessity, through repetition, through the understanding that certain thoughts were luxuries she couldn't afford. Thinking about the crash meant thinking about the woman. Thinking about the woman meant thinking about the words she had said. Thinking about those words meant sitting with a feeling she had no idea what to do with. So she didn't. She did what she always did. She moved. She calculated. She survived. Day one after the crash, she found a dry set of socks at the St. Vincent de Paul donation bin on Marker Street. Someone had left a garbage bag of clothes that hadn't been processed yet, and Emma went through it quickly, taking only what she needed, leaving the rest. Socks, a flannel shirt, men's large, but it layered well, a wool beanie that smelled like cedar, and something floral, like it had been stored in a drawer for years before whoever owned it decided they were done with it. She thought about that person sometimes, the anonymous donors behind the garbage bags. What had their life looked like? What had changed that they were giving this away now? Had they downsized, moved, lost someone? She didn't know, she never knew, but she was grateful, quietly and completely, the way she was grateful for everything that kept her functional. Not gushing, not performative, just real. Day 2, she worked. She had 3 regular spots where she could count on day labor. A restaurant supply warehouse near the port that sometimes needed extra hands for unloading. A flower market on the north end that needed sorters on Wednesday mornings. And a car detailing operation on Beacon Hill run by a man named Ferris, who paid cash and asked no questions and expected no explanations. She hit 2 of the 3, earned $43, bought food, bought a replacement jacket from a thrift store, a thin quilted thing that wasn't as good as the Army surplus coat, but was better than nothing. She didn't let herself think about why she no longer had the Army surplus coat. Day 3, she felt it. The feeling started in the morning, low and subtle, the way a sound can register in your body before your brain has named it. A prickling, a heightened quality to the air around her. The sense that something in her environment had changed in a way she hadn't yet identified. Emma had learned to trust this feeling completely. It had kept her safe more times than she could count. She paid attention. The first motorcycle she noticed was parked outside the flower market when she arrived for her Wednesday shift. That alone meant nothing. Motorcycles existed, people rode them, they parked them places. She noted it and moved on. The second one she noticed was moving. She was walking down First Avenue around noon, eating a granola bar, and a motorcycle slowed as it passed her. She felt the deceleration before she consciously registered it. By the time she looked up, it had already sped up again and turned the corner. She stopped walking. She stood on the sidewalk for a full 30 seconds, granola bar in hand, replaying it. The slowdown, the angle of the rider's head, turned just slightly in her direction, like they were looking. You're being paranoid, she told herself. She kept walking. The third one was impossible to dismiss. She was cutting through the alley behind the Pike Place Market Annex, a route she used to avoid the tourist density on the main stretch. When she became aware of an engine idling somewhere behind her, she didn't look back immediately. Looking back too fast announced fear, and fear made you a target. She kept her pace steady, turned left at the next crossing, then right again, changing direction without appearing to change direction. The engine followed, not aggressively, not chasing, just following, keeping distance. Staying with her through the turns, Emma's heart rate climbed steadily like a dial being turned. She came out onto a wider street, ducked into a corner store, moved to the back near the refrigerated drink section, and watched the front window. A motorcycle slowed outside, stopped. The rider sat there for a moment, then reached up and removed their helmet. It was a woman late 30s, dark hair pulled back tight. She was looking at the store with the careful, neutral expression of someone who was watching without trying to look like they were watching. Emma knew that expression. She'd worn it herself 1,000 times. She bought a bottle of water she didn't need and went out the back. She changed her patterns entirely after that. Different routes, different timing, different shelter spots. She pulled back from the day labor locations she'd used consistently, which cost her money she couldn't really afford to lose, but which she told herself was necessary. Predictability was vulnerability. She had always known that. She told herself the motorcycles were a coincidence. She told herself she'd imagined the following. She told herself that Victoria Hayes was a woman who'd been in an accident and been treated and gone back to her life and had no particular reason to remember the anonymous girl who'd helped her in an alley. She told herself this so many times over the next 2 days that she almost believed it. Then she came back to the loading dock on Briggs. A mistake. She knew it was a mistake. She'd broken her own rule about rotating sleeping spots and found the envelope. It was wedged against the wall exactly where she usually put her back when she slept. Not left casually, placed deliberately. Whoever left it had known where she slept and had known how she positioned herself. Her blood went cold. She didn't touch it for a full minute. She stood there in the early dark and looked at it and ran every possible calculation she could think of. Who knew she slept here? The answer was nobody, supposedly. She'd been careful. She was always careful, but someone had been more careful. She picked up the envelope. It was a plain white business envelope, unsealed, no writing on the outside. Inside was a single index card. 4 words, handwritten in a clear, no-nonsense script. We want to thank you. And below that, a phone number. Emma read it twice. Then she sat down on the loading dock floor with the card in her hands and felt the adrenaline move through her in waves. And she breathed through it the way Gerald the paramedic had once told her to breathe through a panic response. Slow from the belly, count 4 in, count 4 out. We want to thank you, not a threat, not a warning, not a demand, a thank you. Her first instinct was still to run. Old habits don't die clean. They linger. They argue. They find reasons why this time is different, and the threat is real, and the safe move is to disappear. She'd been doing this long enough that her nervous system had essentially been rewired for flight. Thank you could be a setup. Thank you could mean a dozen different things. Powerful people thanking you for something had a way of coming with expectations attached. She turned the card over in her hands. The handwriting was neat, controlled, patient. She thought about Victoria's voice in the alley. The way she'd said Emma's name after Emma had told it to her, not the way most people said names as social punctuation, but like she was filing it somewhere important. She thought about, you are not nobody. Emma sat on that loading dock for a very long time. Then she did something she had not done in years. She decided to trust someone. She waited 2 more days before she called, partly because 2 days gave her time to think clearly, and partly because she wanted to demonstrate to herself and to whoever was on the other end of that number that she was not desperate, not rushed, not operating from fear. She was making a choice. She used the same payphone she'd used to call the ambulance. It rang twice. Yeah, a man's voice, deep, unhurried, the voice of someone who was used to people calling him when things were serious. Someone left me a card, Emma said. Said you wanted to thank me. A pause, not a surprise pause, more like a settling pause, the kind that comes before something deliberate. Emma Collins, the man said. Her name in his mouth stopped her cold. How do you know my name? Victoria told us. She hadn't given Victoria her last name. She'd barely given her first name, and only because Victoria had asked directly. She held the phone tighter. How do you know my last name? We're good at finding things out, he said, not threateningly, just factually, the way you might tell someone you're good at cooking or good at math. A plain statement of capability. Who are you? Emma asked. My name is Michael Walker. People call me Stone. I'm the chapter president of the Seattle Hells Angels. Another pause. Victoria is my family. You saved her life. The words landed with a weight Emma hadn't expected. She saved herself, Emma said automatically. I just moved the bike. You stayed, Stone said. You gave her your jacket. You called the ambulance, and then you stayed until they got there, and you made sure she was okay before you left. That's not nothing, Emma. Something about hearing her own name said that way. Firm, clear, without condescension. Made her throat tighten unexpectedly. I didn't do it for a reward, she said. I know, Stone said. That's why we want to give you one. Emma was quiet. We just want to meet you, he said. Buy you a meal. Say thank you in person. No obligations, no expectations. You eat, you listen to what we want to say, and if you want to leave after that, you leave. Nobody follows you. Nobody bothers you again. And if I say no to meeting you, then I guess you say no. A beat. But Victoria asked me to find you herself. She's still in the hospital. She's asking about you. Emma pressed her back against the phone booth and looked up at the screen, a reflex, something about needing a larger frame of reference. She's asking about me, Emma repeated. Every day. She closed her eyes. Where, she said. Tim. She almost didn't go. The morning of the day they'd agreed to meet, a diner on Eastlake, 11 a.m. She'd chosen the location herself because she needed to feel like she had some control over the geography. Emma woke up and lay on her back on the loading dock with her arm over her eyes and talked herself out of it 3 separate times. They're bikers. You don't know what they want. Thank you is a door, not a destination. Once you walk through it, you don't know what's on the other side. People like this don't do things without reasons. You have nothing to offer them. You are nobody. That last one was the one she always came back to. The bedrock argument. The foundational reason not to reach for anything. You are nobody. And then, like a splinter working its way out, she heard Victoria's voice saying the opposite. She got up. She washed her face in the bathroom of a McDonald's 4 blocks away. She ate breakfast, coffee, and an egg sandwich, bought with money she'd earned moving flower boxes. She walked to the diner on Eastlake and stood outside it for 6 minutes before she went in. Stone was already there. She recognized him immediately, not because she'd expected to, but because he had the quality of a person who was impossible to miss. He was somewhere in his early 60s, large in the shoulders, with close-cropped gray hair and a beard that had been gray for so long, it probably didn't remember being another color. He was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, no leather jacket, no visible insignia, and he was sitting in a booth near the window with his hands around a coffee mug and his eyes on the door. When she walked in, he stood up. That surprised her. She hadn't expected that. Emma, he said. Stone, she said, because it seemed right to use it. He extended his hand. She shook it. Firm, brief, straightforward. She slid into the booth across from him, keeping her backpack on her lap, one arm through the strap. He noticed. He didn't comment. A waitress appeared. Emma ordered coffee and scrambled eggs, and she ordered it directly without asking Stone's permission or checking his face, because she had decided before walking in that she was going to behave like a person who had a right to be here, even if the rest of her wasn't sure that was true. Stone watched her order. Something in his expression shifted slightly. Approval, maybe. or recognition. You're not what I expected, he said when the waitress left. What did you expect? I don't know, someone more. He searched for the word. Uncertain. I'm uncertain, Emma said. I'm just not going to show it to someone I just met. He looked at her steadily. Then he smiled. A real smile, small, with effort behind it. The kind that didn't appear often on a face like that. Victoria said you were direct. Victoria talked about me? She's been talking about you since the night of the accident. Stone set down his coffee mug. You have to understand something about Victoria Hayes. She's been with this chapter for 32 years. She's seen things that would... He stopped, chose differently. She's not easy to impress. She's not easy to move. She looks at people and she sees exactly what's there. No more, no less. He paused. She hasn't stopped talking about you. Emma didn't know what to do with this information. She felt it trying to mean something to her, and she held it at arm's length because meaning was dangerous and she'd learned not to let things mean too much. How is she? Emma asked. Leg is going to take time. She's not patient about that. A flicker of something affectionate crossed his face. She's been running the chapter from her hospital bed. Her nurse threatened to confiscate her phone twice. Emma almost smiled. She wants to see you, Stone said. Emma's almost smile disappeared. I know. Will you? She looked down at her coffee. She thought about 4 years of not letting herself want things. She thought about the weight of the motorcycle under her hands and the feeling of her muscles shaking and the moment when it finally moved. She thought about an index card with 4 words on it and a phone number she'd stared at for 2 days. Yeah, she said quietly. I'll see her. Stone nodded once, like something had been resolved. The food came. They ate. Emma ate everything on the plate and didn't apologize for how fast she did it because she was hungry, and Stone was a person who, she was increasingly certain, did not respect apology for things that didn't deserve apology. Halfway through the meal, she said, Why did you come yourself? You're the chapter president. Don't you have people for, I don't know, errand things? Stone put down his fork. You saved Victoria. I'm not sending an errand boy to thank you for saving Victoria. It was so simple, so unambiguous. Emma sat with it for a moment. She's important to you, Emma said. She's the most important person I know, he said. And the way he said it, flatly, without performance, without the self-consciousness that usually comes when men admit things like that, made it land with complete credibility. Victoria built something. She built the kind of thing that doesn't exist most places. He stopped again. Then, you'll see when you meet her properly. She'll show you better than I can tell you. Emma nodded. She was quiet for a moment. Then, how did you know where I slept? The loading dock. Stone didn't look away. We asked around, quietly. People who work in that area, people who know that area. We weren't the only ones looking. What do you mean? The paramedics asked about the girl who called the ambulance. A shopkeeper on First described someone matching your description to 2 of our people. The woman at the flower market knew your face. He met her eyes. You're more visible than you think, Emma. You've just been in an environment where nobody was paying attention. She thought about that. The idea that she'd spent 4 years working so hard to be invisible, and the invisibility had been less about her and more about whether anyone was looking. That's a strange thing to say, she said. It's a true thing, Stone said. Emma pushed her empty plate aside. She looked at the man across from her, this large, careful, plain-spoken man who had come himself without ceremony to say thank you to a homeless girl. And she decided something. Okay, she said, tell me about her before I see her. Tell me who Victoria is. And Stone did. He talked for 40 minutes. He talked about a woman who had come into this chapter 3 decades ago as the wife of a founding member and had, slowly, by virtue of who she was rather than any title or position, become its center of gravity. He talked about Victoria at family cookouts, putting food in people's hands before they knew they were hungry. He talked about Victoria visiting members in prison, visiting their families when they couldn't. He talked about her tracking down a member's estranged daughter and flying to Phoenix to bring her home when the member had 6 weeks to live and was too proud to ask for help. He talked about her keeping people together through things that should have pulled them apart. She's the one who kept everyone human, Stone said. And that was the sentence that stayed with Emma longest. Not the stories, the sentence. The one who kept everyone human. Because Emma understood, better than Stone maybe realized, what it meant to exist in a world that was trying to make you less than you were. And she understood what it meant to have one person in that world who refused to let you become less. She'd just never had that person before. She was starting to understand that she might be looking at someone who could find her one. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic in someone's floral arrangement that was a day past its best. Emma stood at the doorway and looked at Victoria Hayes lying in the bed with her left leg elevated and an IV in her arm and the same leather jacket draped over the back of the visitor's chair. Because even here, even in a hospital gown with a bandage on her forehead, Victoria apparently needed the jacket nearby. Victoria looked up and she smiled. Not the smile of someone who was being polite, not the smile of someone who was playing a role. The real thing, full, unguarded, immediate. The smile of someone who has been waiting for something and has just stopped waiting. There she is, Victoria said. Emma walked in. She stopped at the foot of the bed. She didn't know what to do with her hands, which almost never happened to her. Sit down, Victoria said, gesturing to the chair. You make me nervous standing there. Emma sat. Up close, in daylight, without rain and adrenaline between them, Victoria Hayes was not what Emma had imagined during the days she'd spent not thinking about her. She was striking in a way that had nothing to do with conventional beauty. Lined face, sharp eyes, silver hair cut short and practical. She looked like a woman who had made 1,000 difficult decisions and was comfortable with all of them. She looked like someone who had been through things and come out the other side, not softened but deepened. You look different without the rain, Victoria said. You look different without the motorcycle on top of you, Emma said. Victoria laughed, the same sharp, bright reflex Emma had heard in the alley. There it is. She leaned back against her pillow, looking at Emma with that same direct assessment. I've been trying to figure out what to say to you for 5 days. You don't have to say anything, Emma said. I want to. Victoria was quiet for a moment. You tore up your only jacket. I had socks, Emma said. I was okay. Victoria looked at her for a long moment. No, you weren't. Emma opened her mouth, closed it. You were freezing and alone and you had nothing and you still gave me everything you had, Victoria said. Her voice was controlled, but underneath the control, there was something that had been sitting on a low heat for 5 days and was taking effort to keep there. I've known a lot of people in my life, Emma. A lot of people. I've known people who had very little and still couldn't give. And I've known people who had everything and still couldn't give. You had nothing, and you gave. Emma's jaw was tight. She didn't want to cry in front of a woman she just met. She wasn't going to cry in front of a woman she just met. It's what anyone would have done, she said. No, Victoria said, with a quiet certainty that closed the argument. It isn't. Silence stretched between them. Emma looked at her hands. Victoria let the silence sit because she was clearly a person who understood that certain silences were doing necessary work and shouldn't be interrupted. Then Victoria said, I want to help you. Emma looked up. Not as a transaction, Victoria said immediately, reading Emma's face with unsettling accuracy. Not because I owe you and I need to pay the debt so I can stop thinking about it. That's not what this is. She paused. I looked at you in that alley, Emma, and I saw someone who was surviving when she should be living. There's a difference. I've seen it in people enough times to know it. What? Emma's throat was tight. You don't know me. I know what you did, Victoria said. I know what it cost you to do it. And I know you walked away after without asking for a single thing. She tilted her head slightly. What do you need? Just tell me, honestly. Emma laughed, short and incredulous and a little ragged at the edges. You can't just ask that. Why not? Because Emma stopped. Because it was too much. Because needs were private. Because wanting things in front of someone else was an exposure she'd been protecting herself from for 4 years. Because if you told people what you needed and they couldn't give it or wouldn't give it or disappeared, the wanting was worse than not having. Because it's dangerous, Emma said finally. Victoria nodded slowly, like that was the exact answer she'd expected and the exact answer she'd been waiting for. Yeah, she said softly. I know. She reached across the bed rail and put her hand over Emma's, not patronizing, not pitying, just there, present, warm. You don't have to decide anything right now, Victoria said. You don't have to trust me today. You don't have to trust anyone today. She squeezed Emma's hand once, then let go. But I want you to know, you've got somewhere to come back to, whenever you're ready, whatever ready means for you. Emma stared at the space between them. She had been keeping herself at controlled distance from this moment since she'd found the card on the loading dock. She'd managed the distance through logic and habit and the long-practiced skill of not letting things in too far. But Victoria Hayes, lying in a hospital bed with a bandaged head and a splinted leg, and absolutely no performance about her, was looking at Emma Collins with the kind of eyes that did not see a homeless girl or a problem or a charity case. She was looking at her like she was a person worth looking at. And Emma, who had spent 4 years building herself into someone invisible, felt something in the architecture of that invisibility begin, quietly and irrevocably, to crack. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to, because Victoria could see it too, and she leaned back against her pillow and said nothing. And then the two of them sat together in the quiet of that hospital room, and outside the window, the city moved through its afternoon like nothing extraordinary was happening, and maybe nothing was. Or maybe a girl who had given everything she had to a stranger was finally, for the first time in years, beginning to receive something back. She went back 3 more times before Victoria left the hospital, not because anyone asked her to, not because she'd made any kind of commitment or agreement or promise. She went back because each time she got to the end of a day and ran her numbers, food, shelter, weather, distance, she found herself calculating a 4th thing she hadn't been calculating before. Whether she had time to stop by Harborview before visiting hours ended. And each time the answer was yes. And each time she told herself it would be the last time, and each time she went anyway. On the 2nd visit, Victoria was sitting up in bed with a legal pad on her knee and a pen in her hand, and the expression of a person conducting a meeting that the other participants didn't know they were in. She was on the phone when Emma arrived, and she held up one finger. "Give me a minute." And Emma sat in the chair and listened to half a conversation that involved words like lease renewal and insurance. And tell him to call me back himself, not his lawyer, himself, delivered in a tone that suggested Victoria Hayes had 0 interest in intermediaries. When she hung up, she looked at Emma and said, without preamble, "You're here again. You're allowed to have other visitors," Emma said. "I'm not complaining." Victoria set the legal pad aside. "I'm observing. You don't seem like someone who does things twice unless she means to." Emma didn't answer, mostly because Victoria was right. "How'd you sleep last night?" Victoria asked. "Fine." "Where?" Emma looked at her steadily. "That's a personal question." "I'm a personal person," Victoria said without apology. "Where, Emma?" "A beat. The loading dock on Briggs." Victoria's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. A tightening, brief and controlled. "It's going to get cold. We're heading into October." "I know when we're heading," Emma said. "I know you know," Victoria said. And then, because she seemed to understand that pushing directly on the subject of Emma's living situation was going to produce resistance, the way a thumb on a bruise produces flinching, she changed direction entirely. "Tell me something about yourself that isn't about survival." Emma blinked. "What?" "Something you like, something you're good at, something that has nothing to do with keeping yourself alive." Victoria tilted her head. There must be something. Emma opened her mouth and then didn't say anything because the question had landed in a place she hadn't examined in a while. The honest answer was that she'd spent so long in survival mode that the line between who she was and what she needed to do to stay alive had blurred to the point where she sometimes couldn't find it. She read when she could get access to books. She was good at math, always had been, even in the scattered schooling of her childhood. She had a memory that her 3rd-grade teacher had once called almost unsettling because she could read a page once and recite it back nearly word for word. "I remember things," Emma said finally. "Like everything. Conversations, pages I've read, maps of places I've only been once. I don't forget." Victoria looked at her. "Everything?" "Pretty much." "That must be both useful and terrible." Emma almost smiled. "Pretty much," she said again. Victoria studied her for a moment. "What else?" "I'm good at math." "What kind?" "Any kind. Numbers make sense to me, the way they fit together." She paused. Before everything, I used to think I'd maybe study it. At a university. That was before I understood that wasn't going to happen. She said it flatly, without self-pity, the way you state a fact about the weather. It was what it was. The door had closed, and she'd accepted it, and she didn't spend time standing in front of closed doors. But Victoria was looking at her with an expression that Emma couldn't quite read. Not pity. Definitely not pity. Something more like someone who has just identified where a puzzle piece goes and is deciding whether this is the right moment to say so. She didn't say so. Not yet. She asked another question instead, and then another, and Emma found herself talking for 40 minutes about things she hadn't said out loud in years. Not the hard things, not the history, but the small interior things, the preferences and observations and ideas that had been living quietly in her head with nowhere to go. And Victoria listened the way very few people knew how to listen, without filling silences or rushing to respond or redirecting to herself. Just genuinely receiving what Emma was giving her, like it mattered, like every word was worth keeping. When visiting hours ended, Emma left. Standing in the elevator on the way down, she realized her hands had been completely still for the entire visit. She hadn't gripped anything. She hadn't braced for anything. She just sat and talked. She stood in the elevator and looked at her own hands like they belonged to a stranger. Then she went back to Briggs Street and lay on the loading dock and looked at the ceiling she couldn't see in the dark. And she thought, I have to be careful. I have to be very careful. Because something was happening that she didn't have a name for, and things she didn't have names for were the things that had the most power to hurt her. She knew that. She also knew she was going back tomorrow. Victoria was discharged on a Thursday morning, 12 days after the crash. Stone called Emma on the payphone. She'd given him the number, another small crossing of a line she'd drawn, and told her Victoria was going home and wanted to know if Emma would be there. Where's home? Emma asked. Stone gave her an address. She knew the street. It was in a neighborhood she moved through regularly, solid working-class houses on wide lots. The kind of neighborhood that had resisted both gentrification and full deterioration and just continued being itself steadily, year after year. She went. She arrived at the same time as 3 motorcycles and a pickup truck, which she had not anticipated. 2 of the riders she'd never seen. One was the dark-haired woman she'd spotted outside the corner store a week ago, the one who'd been watching. The truck belonged to a big man named Dex, who moved with the unhurried solidity of someone who had never once been in a hurry and wasn't planning to start. They all looked at Emma when she arrived. She stopped on the sidewalk. Dex looked at her for a moment, then nodded. One nod, brief, like a decision being finalized. You're the girl, he said. I'm Emma, she said. Dex. He extended a hand. She shook it. Victoria talks about you like you hung the moon. Emma didn't know what to say to that. She decided not to say anything and moved toward the house. The dark-haired woman fell into step beside her. I'm Renata. I was following you last week. Emma looked at her sideways. I know. You made it difficult. I know that too. Renata studied her profile for a step or two. Good, she said finally, like that was the answer she'd been hoping for. The house was filled with people by the time they got Victoria settled. Someone had brought food, a lot of food, more food than made immediate sense. The kind of spread that appears when a community has a shared understanding that this moment requires nourishment. Emma sat at the kitchen table and ate a plate of food someone put in front of her and tried to keep track of the names coming at her. Dex, Renata, a man named Cutter, who was younger than the rest and had a laugh that arrived without warning and left just as fast. A woman called Mama Lou, who must have been in her 70s and had opinions about the proper way to make cornbread that she shared with anyone who would listen and some who wouldn't. What struck Emma? Watching all of it. The movement of people through the space, the way they talked to each other, the easy physical comfort of people who had known each other long enough to stop performing, was that it looked like what families looked like on television. Not the conflict and dysfunction that made good drama, but the quieter thing, the just being together thing, the thing she had watched through windows and screens her whole life, like it was something that existed for other people. She was inside it. She didn't know how to be inside it. She watched a man named Teller refill Victoria's water glass without being asked, and watched Victoria thank him without looking up from her conversation. And she understood that this was so practiced, so embedded, that it had stopped being an act of care and just become the way things were. That was the thing about real belonging. It went invisible. It stopped needing to announce itself. It just was. Emma held her plate in both hands and watched and felt something moving in her chest that she didn't want to look at directly. Hey, Cutter appeared beside her, dropping into the chair across the table. He had his own plate and was eating with the focused enthusiasm of a person who takes food seriously. You doing okay over here? You've got this look. What look? Emma asked. Like you're doing math on something that doesn't have numbers. Emma looked at him. He was maybe 25, with a quick face and attentive eyes that were sharper than his easy manner suggested. I'm fine, she said. Sure, he said pleasantly, and took another bite. Victoria says you've got a memory like a computer. Victoria talks too much about me. Victoria talks exactly the right amount about everything, Cutter said, with the cheerful certainty of someone stating universal law. She told me you did day labor at the flower market. Sometimes. You ever work with engines? Emma frowned. No. You want to learn? He said it casually between bites, like it wasn't particularly significant, like offering to teach someone a skill was just something you did at the table while eating. Why, Emma asked. He shrugged. We've got a shop. Does basic mechanical work, some custom builds. We're always short-handed. It's not glamorous, but it's cash and it's indoors, and he glanced at her jacket, brief and tactful. It's consistent. Emma set her plate down. She looked at him steadily. Why would you do that? Cutter stopped eating. He looked at her with an expression that was more serious than his general presentation suggested he was capable of. Because Victoria asked us to look out for you, he said, and because you came into an alley in the rain and you stayed. Those are both good enough reasons. Emma was quiet for a moment. I'm not looking for charity, she said. Good, Cutter said, because I'm not offering it. I'm offering a job. You'd work for it. It'd be real work, not easy work. He picked his fork back up. Think about it. She thought about it for the rest of the afternoon. Sure. It was Victoria who finally said the thing directly. Late in the afternoon, when the crowd had thinned and Mama Lou had gone home, and Dex and Renata were somewhere in the back talking in low voices, Emma found herself sitting beside Victoria's chair in the front room, both of them with cups of coffee, the house settling into early evening quiet. Cutter talked to you, Victoria said. Not a question. About the shop job, yeah. Will you take it? Emma turned the coffee cup in her hands. I don't know how to work on engines. You can learn. You're good with your hands. I know that from personal experience. Victoria touched the bandage on her forehead lightly, without drama. You're smart. You're reliable. Cutter's easy to work with. It's not about whether I can do the job, Emma said. Victoria waited. Emma stopped. She tried again. Everything you're offering, the job, the coming here, the people, all of it. It's a lot. And I've learned that when things seem like a lot, there's usually, I don't know, a cost somewhere I'm not seeing yet. Victoria didn't dismiss this. She didn't rush to reassure Emma that everything was fine and there was no catch and she should just trust them. She sat with it for a moment, really sat with it, and then she said, that's a reasonable thing to have learned. Emma looked at her. I'm not going to tell you there's no risk, Victoria said. I'm not going to promise you that nothing will ever go wrong, or that these people are perfect, or that this is going to be easy, because that's not how any of this works. She paused. But I can tell you that what you see is what there is. These people, what they showed you today, that's what they are. They're not always easy. They're not always graceful. But they're real, and they don't give up on people they claim. How do they claim people? Emma asked. Victoria looked at her directly. The way I'm looking at you right now. The room was very quiet. Emma's jaw was tight and her hands were still around the coffee cup, and she was working very hard to maintain the controlled distance she'd been carrying like armor her whole life, and it was failing her, slowly and completely, in the face of this woman's absolute straightforwardness. I've been on my own since I was 16, Emma said. I know. I don't know how to do this. She gestured vaguely at the room, at all the evidence of the afternoon, at everything it represented. Any of this. Nobody does at first, Victoria said quietly. You learn it the same way you learned everything else. One day at a time, one meal at a time, one person at a time. She leaned forward slightly. Emma, You don't have to have it figured out to say yes. Emma looked at her. You just have to say yes, Victoria said. That's all, just yes. The silence stretched. Emma thought about 4 years on the streets. She thought about calculated distances and shelter closing times, and the cold that was coming with October, and the loading dock on Briggs, and waking up every morning and running the numbers, and the numbers being enough to survive on, but never quite enough for anything else. She thought about a kitchen full of people passing food. She thought about the word yes and how it felt in her mouth. Like a door opening, like something moving that had been still for a very long time. Okay, she said. Just that, just okay. And Victoria sat back in her chair and looked at Emma with an expression that Emma would think about later, in the quiet, trying to find the right word for it. Not triumph, not relief exactly. Something older and warmer than either of those. The expression of a person who has held out a hand in the dark and felt someone take it. She started at the shop the following Monday. The shop was a converted warehouse space that Cutter ran with another member named Bricks, a name that suited him, and a mechanic's apprentice named Devin, who was 19 and knew more about engines than most adults twice his age and communicated primarily through grunts that Emma quickly learned to decode. Bricks didn't say much either, but he watched everything, and his silences weren't unfriendly, just economical. He was a person who saw no reason to use words when his hands were already explaining. The work was physical and technical and demanding in ways Emma hadn't expected. Her hands blistered in the first week. Her back ached in ways that were different from carrying a backpack aching. This was a focused soreness, specific muscles being asked to do new things. She came home. She was staying in a spare room at Victoria's, an arrangement that had happened so practically and without ceremony that Emma hadn't quite registered it as a transition until she'd been doing it for 3 days. She came home each night with grease under her fingernails and the particular satisfaction of work that left something real behind. Cutter was a good teacher, patient in a way she hadn't expected from someone whose surface manner was all quick energy and deflection. He explained things once clearly and then let her try without hovering. When she made mistakes, and she made them, regularly and without apology, he corrected them with the neutrality of someone who understood that mistakes were data, not character flaws. You learn fast, he told her, at the end of the first week. I told you I remember things, she said. Remembering and doing are different things, he said. You do them the same. It was a compliment delivered sideways, which she was starting to understand was the local style. These were not people who performed warmth. They expressed it in coverage, in showing up, in staying, in the cup of coffee that appeared on your workbench without comment, in the way Bricks started leaving the better tools near her station without explanation. She stopped waiting for the catch, slowly, incompletely, with relapses, but she stopped waiting. 3 weeks in, the first real test came. It came in the form of a man named Garrett. Not someone she'd met, not a member, someone connected to the chapter through layers of association that Emma didn't fully understand yet. He came into the shop on a Wednesday afternoon, and he looked at Emma in a way she recognized immediately. The look that said he was filing her into a category, trying to figure out what she was and what she could to be used for. She kept working. He spoke to Cutter for a few minutes near the front, and then he drifted back toward Emma's station. She heard him before she saw him settle onto a stool nearby. You're the new girl, he said. I'm working, she said. Victoria's project? She set down her wrench, slowly. She turned and looked at him with the complete attention of someone who has been managing threats her whole life and knows exactly how to signal that she is not going to be managed. I'm not anyone's project, she said. I work here. Garrett smiled in a way that didn't include his eyes. Sure, right. He looked around the shop. Must be nice, going from the street to all this. In what, a month? Emma held his gaze. Is there something I can help you with? Mechanically? Just making conversation. I'm busy. He leaned forward slightly. You know, people around here might start wondering what you're actually getting out of all this. Garrett, Cutter's voice came from across the shop, even, unhurried, like he'd been listening the entire time, which he had. You got what you came for. You can go. A beat, Garrett looked at Emma one more time, recalibrating something, then stood. Just talking, he said to the room. I know what you were doing, Cutter said. Same even voice. Go ahead. Garrett left. Emma turned back to the engine she was working on. Her hands were steady, which surprised her slightly. Her heart was beating faster, but her hands were steady, and she focused on that. Cutter appeared beside her bench. He didn't say anything for a moment, just picked up a rag and wiped his hands. That happens sometimes, he said. People testing what's here. It's not about you specifically. I know what it's about, Emma said. He glanced at her. You okay? I've handled worse. She paused. Thank you for... She gestured vaguely toward where Garrett had been. Cutter shrugged. You were handling it? Still. He nodded once. Still, he agreed, and went back to his station. She worked until 6. When she left, Brix was locking up, and he handed her a paper bag without looking at her directly. Mama Lou sent food, he said, like this required explanation. Don't make a big thing. Emma took the bag. I won't, she said. She walked back to Victoria's with the paper bag in her hand and the last of the day's light following her down the street, and she thought about the word still. Such a small word, just an agreement, a confirmation that something counted even when you'd manage without it. She turned it over in her mind the way she turned over numbers, looking for the meaning underneath. She found it. You weren't alone in it. That's what it meant. You handled it, yes, but you weren't alone in it. Someone was paying attention. Someone was paying the kind of attention that didn't announce itself until it was needed. That was new. That was completely, uncomplicatedly new. Victoria was in the kitchen when Emma got home. On the phone again. She was always on the phone, the chapter running through her the way blood ran through everyone else, constant and necessary and not requiring thought. She pointed at the table when Emma came in, indicating that Emma should sit, and finished her call in another 3 minutes with a rapidity that suggested the other person had been firmly informed that the conversation was ending. How was the shop? Victoria asked, sitting across from her. Emma thought about the afternoon. Educational, she said. Victoria's eyes sharpened. Garrett. Emma looked at her. You know already. Cutter texted. She said it without apology. Are you okay? Yes, Emma said, and meant it. Victoria studied her for a moment. He's not someone you need to worry about long term. He pushes edges to see what holds. Now he knows. What does he know? That you hold, Victoria said simply. Emma was quiet. She opened the paper bag from Mama Lou and found cornbread and 2 containers of something that smelled like a stew that had been going all day, rich and complex. The kind of food that implied someone had spent hours making sure it was right. She ate in Victoria's kitchen, and Victoria drank her coffee, and they talked about small things. The shop, the weather turning, a leaky faucet in the hallway that needed addressing. And Emma noticed, with the part of her brain that cataloged everything, that this was what comfortable felt like. Not exciting, not significant, just easy. Just 2 people in a kitchen at the end of a day, eating food someone had made with care. She'd spent 4 years believing this kind of ordinary was behind glass. Something to look at from the outside. She was sitting inside it. She kept waiting to feel the catch. The thing that would reveal the cost she hadn't seen yet. The door that would close. She kept waiting for the version of this that she knew. The one where things appeared and then disappeared. Where safety was temporary. Where the people who seemed real turned out to be conditional. It didn't come. That night, later, lying in the spare room that was starting to feel less spare and more like just the room, with a real bed and a window and a door she could close, Emma lay on her back and stared at the dark ceiling and had a conversation with herself. This could still fall apart, she said to herself. Yes, she answered. It could. You could lose this. Yes, so why are you letting yourself have it? She thought about that for a long time. The room was quiet. Outside, the city made its nighttime sounds. Distant traffic, a dog somewhere, the particular quality of air in a residential neighborhood at midnight. Finally, she found the answer. Because I already know what it costs to not have it. She'd been paying that cost for 4 years, the cost of the absence, of protection, of warmth, of being known. She knew exactly what it weighed. She'd been carrying it so long, it had started to feel like just the weight of herself. Inseparable, inevitable. But it wasn't inevitable, it was just what had happened. And what had happened was not the same as what had to keep happening. She had helped a stranger in an alley, and the stranger had sent people to find her and the people had offered her a bomb and a room and food and a version of the world where she existed inside something rather than outside everything. She could say no to it. She could protect herself from it. She could maintain the distance she'd perfected, or she could let it be real. She closed her eyes. She let it be real. In the morning, she was the first one up. She made coffee. She'd watched Victoria make it twice, and she had, as promised, remembered exactly how. And she sat at the kitchen table with her hands around the mug and waited for the day to begin. And she felt, underneath all the caution and calculation and the habits of survival, something she hadn't felt in 4 years. Not happiness exactly, not yet. Something quieter and more durable than happiness. She felt like she was somewhere. Not passing through, not calculating the distance to the next shelter, the next dollar, the next safe corner. Not managing invisibility, just somewhere. Present, real. It was the smallest thing. It was the largest thing she'd ever held. The coffee was the same every morning. Emma made it the way Victoria had shown her. 2.5 scoops, cold water to the 4th line, let it run slow. And she brought it to the table at 6:45 and sat with it while the house was still quiet and did the things she used to do on loading docks and shelter floors, which was take stock. But the stock was different now. It wasn't food, shelter, weather, distance. It was something harder to quantify, something that resisted the clean precision of numbers. And she was still learning the language of it. 6 weeks in Victoria's spare room, 6 weeks at the shop, 6 weeks of Mama Lou's food appearing without announcement, and Cutter's sideways compliments, and Bricks leaving the better tools near her station, and Dex nodding at her in the particular way that she'd come to understand meant you belong here, even though he would never in 100 years say those words out loud. 6 weeks of going to sleep in the same place she'd woken up. She didn't take that last one for granted. She was not sure she would ever take it for granted, and she thought maybe that was all right. Maybe the people who took it for granted were the ones who didn't know what it cost to not have it. Maybe gratitude was sharpest in the people who'd lived without the thing they were grateful for. She was thinking this on a Tuesday morning, hands around her coffee mug, when Victoria appeared in the doorway in her robe with her reading glasses pushed up on her head and her phone already in her hand, which meant the chapter was already requiring her attention before 7 a.m., which was not unusual. But Victoria stopped in the doorway. She looked at Emma sitting at her kitchen table with the coffee she'd made, and the expression that moved across her face was gone too fast to fully read. But Emma caught it, something that looked like quiet, unperformed joy. The expression of a person who sees something they have hoped for and finds it's real. "Morning," Emma said. "Morning." Victoria went to pour her own coffee. "Sleep okay?" "Yeah," a pause. "You?" "Well enough." She settled into the chair across from Emma, phone face down on the table. An act of deliberate priority that Emma recognized and registered. "I have to talk to you about something." Emma's hands tightened slightly on the mug. The old reflex. "Here it is. Here's the cost." She breathed through it. "Okay." Victoria looked at her directly. "I talked to a woman named Karen Solis yesterday. She runs an adult education program through Seattle Community College. GED completion, then credit-bearing courses." She paused. "She has a slot open in the spring cohort. Math track." The room was very quiet. "You talked to someone about me," Emma said. "I talked to someone about a program," Victoria said carefully. "The application is yours to make or not make. I'm not signing you up for anything. I'm telling you a door exists." She held Emma's gaze. "You told me you were good at math. You told me you used to think you'd study it. That was a real thing you wanted. It didn't stop being real just because the years went sideways." Emma looked down at her coffee. Her jaw was tight in the specific way it got when she was processing something that was too large to process quickly. "That costs money," she said. "There are grants for non-traditional students. Karen knows how to navigate them. It's what she does. I'd have to keep working. Cutter says you can adjust your hours. He said it before I even asked him." Emma's head came up. "You talked to Cutter too?" "I talked to people who care about what happens to you," Victoria said, without apology. "That's what people do for each other. I know that's new for you. I know it feels like a lot of hands in your business. But Emma," she leaned forward, "this is what it looks like when people are on your side. It looks like people making calls." Emma stared at her. The thing was, Victoria wasn't wrong. Emma knew that. She knew it the way she knew numbers, cleanly, without ambiguity. She wasn't wrong about what it looked like or what it meant, or what Emma's old life had been missing that this was the presence of. What Emma was having trouble with was not understanding it. It was receiving it. There was a difference. Understanding was safe. You could understand something from a distance. Receiving it meant standing in the open, hands out, letting something land. I don't know if I can do it, Emma said. And this was something she almost never said. She said, I don't want to. She said, that's not practical. She said, that's not how it works. She almost never said, I don't know if I can, because that was the admission underneath all the other admissions. That was the place where the 4 years lived, the accumulated weight of being told in 100 quiet ways that she was not the kind of person things worked out for. Victoria didn't flinch. She didn't rush to say, of course you can, in the breezy way that people said it when they didn't understand what you were actually asking. She sat with the words for a moment, really sat with them, and then she said, that feeling? That's not information about what you're capable of. That's information about what you've been through. Emma was quiet. Those are not the same thing, Victoria said. Emma put her coffee mug down. She pressed both palms flat against the table and looked at them. The hands that had moved a motorcycle, that were learning to read an engine, that had spent 4 years carrying everything she owned. Strong hands, practical hands, hands that had not, she realized slowly, stopped surprising her with what they could do. Okay, she said. Okay, you'll think about it? Or okay, yes? Emma looked up. Okay, yes, I'll apply. Victoria nodded once. No celebration, no excessive display. She picked up her coffee and drank it and reached for her phone. Karen's expecting your call, she said, like this was routine, like this was just the next thing on a list of things. Like a 20-year-old homeless girl deciding to reach for her future was not, in fact, the most significant thing that had happened in this kitchen in a long time. Emma appreciated that more than she could say. She called Karen Solis that afternoon from the shop, standing in the small office at the back while Brix and Devin worked the floor. Karen had a voice that was efficient without being cold. She'd clearly spent years talking to people who expected to be made to feel small and had made a deliberate choice to be the opposite of that. She asked practical questions. Dates, documentation, timeline. She didn't ask Emma why she'd ended up where she had. She treated the past as context and the application as the present. When Emma hung up, she stood in the office for a moment with the phone still in her hand. She had an appointment, Thursday, 2 weeks from now. The application was doable. Karen had already identified 2 grant programs Emma would likely qualify for. It was real. It was an actual real thing. She walked back out to the floor, and Devin looked up from the carburetor he was rebuilding and said, without particular ceremony, you look like someone told you the thing you wanted was possible. Emma looked at him. 19 years old, grease on his chin, watching her with sharp eyes. Is it that obvious? Little bit, he said. Is it good or bad? I don't know yet, she said honestly. He considered this. Usually good starts out feeling like you made a mistake, he said, with the seriousness of someone who had given this genuine thought. Bad starts out feeling like nothing at all. Emma stared at him. He went back to the carburetor. She picked up her wrench and went back to work. And she thought about what Devin had just said, this 19-year-old kid with grease on his chin, and she thought, these are the people. This was what Victoria had been trying to tell her. Not that this community was without flaw or complication or difficulty, not that the Hells Angels were saints in leather, but that inside what the world saw from the outside, there were people who said true things at workbenches and left food without explanation and showed up without being asked. That was the real thing. That was what she'd been outside of. She was inside it now. 2 weeks later, the Thursday of the appointment, Emma came home to find 3 motorcycles parked outside Victoria's house that she didn't recognize. She stopped on the sidewalk. The old calculation ran automatically. Unknown quantity, proceed with caution, assess before entering. She didn't override it. She just let it run and then moved anyway. Because the difference between who she used to be and who she was becoming was not the absence of caution. It was that she no longer let caution make all her decisions for her. She went in. The front room had 5 people in it, none of whom she'd seen before. Stone was there, standing near the window with his arms crossed and an expression that told Emma nothing. Victoria was in her chair, legs still elevated. The splint was coming off in 10 days, which was all Victoria talked about with the suppressed frustration of someone who had been patient for as long as patience was reasonable and intended to be done with it. The three strangers were a man and two women, somewhere in their 40s and 50s, with the particular quality of people who had traveled and were carrying whatever the travel had cost them. The man stood when Emma came in. He was maybe 50, lean, with gray at his temples, and eyes that had the quality of someone who had spent a lot of time watching things carefully. He looked at Emma with an expression she couldn't read. "Emma," Victoria said, "this is Raymond and Carol and Gina." Emma looked at them, then at Victoria. Something in Victoria's posture, a careful stillness, told her this mattered in a way she didn't yet have context for. "Hi," Emma said. Raymond looked at her for a long moment. "You're the one who pulled Victoria out," he said. Not a question, like he'd been studying the answer for a while and was just now saying it out loud. "We got the motorcycle off her together," Emma said. "She did most of it herself." "That's not what I heard," Carol said quietly. Emma looked at the three of them. "I don't understand what's happening right now." Stone unfolded his arms. "They came up from Portland," he said. "Raymond has been with the Portland chapter for 20 years. Victoria and Raymond—" He paused, deferring, and Victoria picked it up. "Raymond is family," Victoria said. "Not chapter family, blood family. He's my brother's son." Emma went very still. Victoria's nephew, who had come from Portland, who was looking at Emma like she was something he had needed to see with his own eyes. "We didn't know if she was going to make it," Raymond said, and his voice had something in it now, something stripped down. "That night when Stone called me, I thought—" He stopped. His jaw worked briefly. "I thought we were going to lose her." Emma didn't say anything. She didn't know what to say. She stood in the doorway of the front room and watched this man, this complete stranger, pull himself back together around an emotion he had been carrying for 6 weeks, and she felt the weight of what the crash had meant to people she'd never considered. The ripples, the reach of it. "I needed to meet you," Raymond said. I needed to say thank you and look at the person I was saying it to." He exhaled. "My aunt is the most important person in my life, my whole family's life." Emma's throat was tight. "I just stopped," she said, because it was still the most truthful answer she had. "I heard her and I stopped." Raymond shook his head slowly. "You were alone in the rain at 9 at night with nothing on you, and you stopped." He met her eyes. "Thank you doesn't cover it. I know that, but I needed to say it to your face." Gina, the younger of the two women, was looking at Emma with an expression that was purely, uncomplicatedly warm. "We heard what's been happening, with the shop, with school. Victoria's kept us updated." Emma looked at Victoria. "You update them about me." "I update them about the people I care about," Victoria said. The same tone she always used, like the most significant things were stated most plainly. Emma turned back to Raymond and his family and felt something she hadn't expected. She felt seen. Not examined, not assessed, not categorized. Seen. By strangers who had driven up from Portland on a weekday because of something she'd done in an alley on a Tuesday night 6 weeks ago. The ripple of one small decision, moving outward through the water in all the directions she hadn't been able to see. She thought about the girl on the loading dock, calculating soup and shelter and distance. She thought about that girl's understanding of her own significance, which was essentially zero. Which was, I am nobody, I leave no ripple, I pass through and nothing marks my passing. She had been wrong. She had been so completely, entirely wrong. Raymond and his family stayed for dinner. Mama Lou materialized. Emma was still not entirely sure how Mama Lou always knew when to appear, whether Victoria called her or whether she simply had a preternatural sense for when a table needed filling. And the house had that quality again, the quality Emma had first noticed and cataloged as looks like what families look like on television. Except she wasn't watching it from the outside anymore. She was at the table. People were handing her things. People were asking her questions about the shop, about the courses she was going to take, about what she thought of Seattle's winters compared to, and then realizing they didn't know where she was from originally and asking that instead. She told them, Oregon, originally, a small town east of Portland. She hadn't been back since she was 12. Raymond said he knew the area. They talked about it, the geography, the specific quality of light in the high desert, the way the weather came in off the mountains. It was a conversation about a place she had complicated feelings about, and it was fine. It was just fine. She wasn't guarding herself through it or calculating what was safe to reveal. She was just talking. She noticed this. She filed it. After dinner, Raymond found her in the kitchen while she was doing dishes. She'd started doing the dishes after every dinner at Victoria's without being asked and without comment, because it was a thing she could do, a contribution that didn't require words. And he leaned against the counter and said, "Can I tell you something without it being weird?" "Probably," Emma said. He almost smiled. "She seems different. Victoria, better even. Settling better than she would have if this had happened and you hadn't been there. Not just physically." He paused, finding the words. "She's been lighter. I don't know if that makes sense." Emma thought about it. "Maybe almost losing something makes you clearer about it." Raymond looked at her. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, that's exactly it." He was quiet for a moment. "She told me what you said in the hospital, that you'd stopped expecting things that weren't going to happen." Emma kept washing. "She has a good memory. She said it broke her heart a little. Someone your age saying that." Emma dried her hands on the dish towel. She turned to look at Raymond. "It was just accurate," she said at the time. And now, she thought about the GED applications sitting on the table in her room. She thought about Karen Solis's efficient, warm voice on the phone. She thought about Devin saying good stars out feeling like you made a mistake. She thought about 6 weeks of mornings with coffee in a kitchen that was becoming hers in the way that didn't require paperwork or permission, just presence. "Now I'm recalibrating," she said. Raymond nodded slowly. He looked like he was going to say something else, and then he decided against it and just nodded. Some things didn't need more words. Emma was starting to understand which things those were. The twist arrived on a Saturday morning, 3 weeks later, and it arrived in the form of a phone call Victoria took in the other room with the door mostly but not entirely closed. Emma wasn't listening. She was at the kitchen table with her GED prep workbook open, the math sections, which she was burning through faster than the program expected, which Karen had said was remarkable, and which Emma thought of as just, numbers make sense, they always have. She was working a problem about quadratic functions when she heard Victoria's voice change register. Not the words, the register. The particular quality that appeared in a voice when the news is bad and the person receiving it is trying to process it without letting the processing show. Emma set down her pencil. She heard, "When?" Then, "How bad?" Then a long silence that was somehow louder than the words. Then, "I'll be there." "No, don't. I'll be there myself." Victoria came out of the other room and Emma looked at her and knew immediately. "What happened?" Emma said. Victoria sat down, which she didn't do without purpose. She sat down at the kitchen table across from Emma and put her phone face down and pressed her hands flat against the surface. And Emma recognized the gesture because she'd done it herself on a morning 6 weeks ago when something too large was trying to fit into her chest all at once. "That was Cutter," Victoria said. "There was an accident at the shop last night, after close." Emma's stomach dropped. "Who?" "Devin." The name hit her cleanly, like a weight dropping. 19 years old, grease on his chin, good starts out feeling like you made a mistake. Devin, who communicated in grunts and spoke truth sideways and knew more about engines than people twice his age. "Is he?" Emma couldn't finish the question. "He's alive," Victoria said immediately. "He's alive, but it's serious. He was working late on his own. He shouldn't have been there alone. That's a rule. He knows the rule." She stopped herself. "He's at Harborview. He's in surgery." Emma stood up. She didn't decide to stand up. Her body made the decision. "I need to go," she said. "Emma, he told me something last month," Emma said. Her voice was steady in the particular way that steadiness requires real effort. "He told me something I've been thinking about ever since. I need to go." Victoria looked at her for a moment, then she stood up too. "I'll drive," she said. The waiting room at Harborview had a quality Emma knew well, the particular compressed time of a place where people were waiting for news they were terrified to receive. Cutter was already there, and Bricks, and 2 other people from the shop she recognized but didn't know well. Cutter looked up when Emma and Victoria arrived, and his face, which was usually quick and mobile and cycling through expressions fast, was very still. "He's still in surgery," Cutter said. Emma sat down beside him. "What happened?" "The lift failed. The hydraulic. He was under a truck." Cutter stopped. He pressed his hands against his knees and looked at the floor for a moment. When he looked back up, his eyes were clear, but the effort it had taken to make them clear was visible. "I checked that lift last week. I checked it." "Machines fail," Emma said. "How was alone?" Cutter said. "He knows the rule. You don't work the floor alone after close. I've said it 100 times. And he shook his head. "He was trying to finish something. You know how he gets. When he's in the middle of something, he doesn't want to stop." Emma knew. She'd seen it. Devon with that particular quality of absorption, the world narrowing to the problem in front of him and everything else falling away. "He gets it from being good at it," she said. Cutter looked at her. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite gratitude, more like recognition. The acknowledgement that she had understood something true about Devon and said it plainly. "Yeah," he said. They waited. The waiting had its own texture, the particular weight of shared silence in a group of people who were not good at sitting still and were doing it anyway out of necessity. Bricks got coffee from the machine and handed it around without asking what anyone wanted, and nobody turned it down. Victoria sat with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the door to the surgical wing, and Emma sat beside Cutter and thought about Devon. She thought about what it meant that being here had not been a calculation. She hadn't run the numbers. She hadn't assessed the risk or the exposure or whether it was wise to be emotionally invested in a 19-year-old kid from the shop. She had just stood up and needed to come, and the needing had been immediate and clean, without ambiguity. That was new. That was the thing she hadn't had language for, and now she did. You couldn't need to be somewhere for someone unless they'd gotten inside the part of you that was capable of needing. Devon had gotten inside there. Cutter had. Bricks, Mama Lou, Stone, Victoria. They were inside her now, which meant she was inside something. Which meant this was not a temporary shelter or a calculated arrangement or a situation she was managing from a safe distance. This was hers. The fear of that and the reality of that lived in her chest simultaneously, right next to each other, inseparable. The surgeon came out 2 hours and 40 minutes later. Emma counted. She always counted. Devon had significant injuries. 2 broken ribs, internal bruising, a damaged spleen that they had been able to repair. He was stable. He was going to need time. He was going to be okay. Cutter's exhale beside Emma was the sound of a man whose lungs had not fully functioned in 2.5 hours suddenly being allowed to work again. He pressed his face into his hands for a moment. 3 seconds, completely private, and Emma looked at the floor and gave him those 3 seconds without witness. Then he looked up. "Okay," he said, to himself, to the room, to nobody in particular. "Okay." Victoria's hand found Emma's arm briefly. Warm, quick, present. Not a statement. Just a point of contact. Emma let herself lean into it, slightly for a moment. Just slightly. Just enough. Devon came home to his own apartment, with Cutter checking on him every day, and Mama Lou establishing a meal delivery schedule that Devon had zero say in. 2 weeks later. Emma went to see him on the 3rd day. She brought food she'd bought herself, not food from Mama Lou. Food she'd made, badly. A soup that had required 4 attempts to get to the point where it was edible, and that she'd made without telling anyone because she'd needed to do this one thing herself without someone stepping in to show her the better way. Devon ate it without complaint, which she appreciated. He was pale and moving carefully, and he had the expression of someone who was in more pain than he was reporting, which she also recognized. "The soup is bad," he said. "I know," she said. "It's better than the hospital food." "That's not a high bar." He almost smiled. He shifted carefully against his pillow and looked at her. "Cutter said you were at the hospital the whole time." "Most of it," she said. Devon was quiet for a moment. "I didn't know people were going to do that. I didn't think that many people would." He stopped. He looked uncomfortable with what he was trying to say. Emma understood that discomfort from the inside. "I know," she said. "It's a strange feeling, being the thing people show up for." Devon looked at her sharply, like she'd said the exact right thing. "Yeah," he said, "exactly that." She sat with him for another hour. They didn't talk the whole time. He fell asleep for part of it, which was fine. Sleep was repair, and Devin needed repair. She sat in the chair beside his bed and thought about what he'd said the afternoon she'd gotten off the phone with Karen Solis. Good starts out feeling like you made a mistake. She thought about how many things in the last 8 weeks had started out feeling like a mistake and had turned into the most solid ground she'd ever stood on. She thought about the loading dock on Briggs, the cold floor, the calculation of soup and shelter and distance. She thought about the girl who had made herself invisible and believed that was the safest way to live. That girl had been wrong. Not wrong to be careful, not wrong to protect herself, just wrong about what protection looked like. She'd been protecting herself from danger, but she'd also been protecting herself from this. From Devin falling asleep in a chair while she kept watch, from Cutter's cleared eyes in a waiting room, from Victoria's hand on her arm, from Mama Lou's food and Brix's silence, and Raymond driving up from Portland to say thank you with his whole face. She'd been protecting herself from the thing that was, it turned out, the only thing worth not protecting yourself from. She walked home to Victoria's in the early evening. Autumn was settling in now, properly, the way Seattle autumn did. Not dramatic but thorough, the air carrying something that was not quite cold but was practicing. She walked with her hands in her pockets and her face up slightly, the way she walked when she wasn't scanning for danger. And she noticed consciously the way you notice things that have changed, that she was not scanning for danger. She was just walking somewhere she was going, walking back to somewhere she'd been, walking the way people walked when they knew where they were going and expected to arrive. She was almost home when her phone rang. The prepaid phone Victoria had gotten her in the first week. Practical and without ceremony, you need to be reachable. And it was Victoria. "Where are you?" Victoria said. "2 blocks, Emma said. "Good," a pause. "Karen Solis called." Emma stopped walking. "She got the grant applications back," Victoria said. And then she said 3 more words, spoken plainly, without flourish, in the same voice she used for everything, because Victoria Hayes delivered significant things the way she delivered all things, directly and without wasting time. 3 words. Emma stood on the sidewalk 2 blocks from home and heard them and felt them land in the place where she kept the things that mattered. "You got in," Victoria said. Emma stood on the sidewalk 2 blocks from home and didn't move for a full 30 seconds. "Emma," Victoria's voice through the phone. "You still there?" "Yeah," Emma said. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "Yeah, I'm here." "The full grant," Victoria said. "Both programs." Karen said it's the strongest first application package she's submitted in 6 years. A pause. "She wanted me to tell you that specifically, that it wasn't close." Emma's free hand had come up to press against her sternum, flat, like she was trying to hold something in place. "Okay," she said. "Okay." Victoria's voice had a quality in it that was not quite amusement, but was adjacent to it. "That's all you've got?" "I'm working on it," Emma said. She heard Victoria exhale. Not frustrated, warm. The exhale of someone who has been holding their breath for someone else. "Come home," Victoria said. "Mama Lou is here, and she made something that requires your immediate attention." Emma started walking. "Mama Lou doesn't need a reason." "She made a reason anyway. Come home." She hung up and kept walking and felt the city moving around her the way cities moved. Indifferent, enormous, full of its own noise and business. And she thought, I got in. 2 words. A door. The door she'd seen close at 16. The door she'd stopped looking at because looking at closed doors was a particular kind of pain she had trained herself out of. That door was open. It had been opened by a grant application she'd filled out at Victoria's kitchen table on a Tuesday night, with Mama Lou's cornbread beside her, and Cutter texting her questions about the shop from 3 blocks away, and Devin, before the accident, sending her a meme about math that was actually funnier than she'd admitted. She'd been surrounded when she filled it out. She hadn't been alone. She thought that might be the thing that made the difference. Not just her abilities. She'd always had the ability. She'd known that and carried it like a stone in her pocket. Something real that didn't change the fact that her hands were otherwise empty. The ability had always been there. What hadn't been there was the surround. The people holding the space steady while she reached. That was what they'd given her. Not the grant, the conditions in which she could become the person who won it. She walked through Victoria's front door, and Mama Lou pointed at the kitchen table without looking up from the stove and said, "Sit," with the authority of a woman who had never once in her life questioned whether she had the right to tell people to sit at a table. And Emma sat, and Victoria came in from the other room and looked at her, and their eyes met across the kitchen. "Well," Mama Lou said. "She got in," Victoria said. Mama Lou put down the spoon she was holding, turned from the stove, and looked at Emma with an expression so direct and complete that Emma felt it like a physical thing. Then Mama Lou crossed the kitchen in 4 steps and pulled Emma's head against her shoulder with one large, warm hand and held it there. And Emma, who had not been held by anyone in 4 years, sat very still and let it happen. "Good girl," Mama Lou said, quietly. Good girl." Emma's eyes burned. She blinked. She was not going to cry over being gotten into a community college program. She absolutely was not. She blinked harder. She cried anyway. Brief, silent 3 breaths worth, with Mama Lou's hand warm on the back of her head, and Victoria standing in the kitchen doorway not saying anything. Just being there, just witnessing it the way some things needed to be witnessed. Then Mama Lou straightened up and patted Emma's shoulder twice and went back to the stove. "Eat first," she said. "Celebrate after. That's the right order." Emma wiped her face with the back of her hand, looked at Victoria. Victoria raised her coffee mug, the smallest possible toast. Nothing dramatic. Just, "I see you, I'm here, this counts." Emma raised her own mug. They drank. She started in January. The first day of the spring cohort, Emma Collins sat in a classroom at Seattle Community College with a new notebook and a pen she'd bought specifically for this. And she looked at the whiteboard where an instructor named Dr. Patricia Wren was writing a series of equations, and she felt 2 things simultaneously. Absolute terror and absolute rightness. The terror she recognized. The rightness was newer. Dr. Wren was a compact woman in her early 50s, with the organized energy of someone who loved her subject and had been teaching it long enough to know exactly what got in the way of people learning it, and that the thing that got in the way was almost never ability. It was almost always fear. She opened the first class by saying this directly, without preamble. "Most of you are here because life put you somewhere you didn't expect to be. Most of you are afraid you can't do this. I'm going to tell you right now that the fear is lying to you, and I'm going to spend the next several months proving it." Emma wrote that down, not the equations, that. She had 8 other students around her. A 43-year-old man named Willis, who'd worked construction for 20 years and decided he wanted something different. A woman named Priya, 38, who'd had to stop her education when her mother got sick and was starting again now that her kids were in middle school. A 25-year-old named Theo, who reminded her slightly of Cutter in the way he deflected seriousness with humor and was clearly using the humor to manage how much he actually cared. Others, each with their own version of the gap between where they'd been and where they were trying to go. Emma was the youngest. She was also, she realized within the first 3 class sessions, the furthest along. Not in terms of what she'd been taught. Her formal education was full of gaps, years of irregular schooling and foster placements and shelter programs. But in terms of the underlying architecture of mathematical thinking, the intuitive sense of how numbers related and what they implied, she had something that Dr. Wren recognized within the first week and addressed directly. She kept Emma after class on a Wednesday. "You finished the placement exam in 20 minutes, Dr. Wren said." "Is that a problem?" Emma asked. "It's an observation." Dr. Wren looked at her over her reading glasses. "How much of this curriculum have you encountered before?" "Formally, not much. I've had access to textbooks sometimes, and I remember everything I read." Dr. Wren processed this. "Everything. Pretty much." "That must be both useful and terrible," Dr. Wren said, and Emma heard the echo of Victoria saying the exact same words 8 months ago in a hospital room, and she smiled before she could stop it. "Someone else told me that," she said. Dr. Wren studied her for a moment with the focused attention of someone who was assessing not what Emma knew, but who Emma was. "I want to talk to you about accelerating your track," she said, "if you're willing." Emma sat very still. "What does that mean?" "It means taking on additional coursework alongside the cohort. Means more work. Means you'd be eligible for the university transfer program in half the expected time." She paused. "It also means I'd need to know you're committed, not just enrolled." committed. Emma thought about the loading dock on Briggs. She thought about soup and shelter closing times. She thought about 4 years of calculating survival. She thought about what it felt like to be calculating something else now. Something with a forward direction. Something with a destination. I'm committed, she said. Dr. Wren nodded once in the decisive way of someone who asks a question because they want the answer, not because they're uncertain of it. Then we'll start Thursday. She told Victoria that night at dinner. Victoria put her fork down and looked at Emma with that expression, the one that had started Emma in the alley and that she'd come to understand was Victoria's truest face, the one she didn't construct for anyone's benefit, the one that was just real. Accelerated track, Victoria said. It means more work, Emma said. I'll adjust my shop hours. I already talked to Cutter. He said, she smiled slightly. He said obviously, which I'm choosing to interpret as supportive. It is supportive, Victoria said. That's Cutter's version of a standing ovation. She picked her fork back up, then set it back down. Emma, yeah, I need to tell you something. Victoria's voice had shifted into the register Emma had learned to pay attention to, the one that meant what was coming was real and required real receiving. I've been talking to a woman named Judith Carver. She's a housing attorney. She does work with non-traditional students. Emma frowned. Housing attorney. There's a program through the city, transitional housing grants for adults in educational programs who were previously unhoused. Victoria met her eyes steadily. It's an application process. It takes time. But if it comes through, Emma, you'd have your own place, your own lease, your name on a door. The kitchen was very quiet. Emma had been living in Victoria's spare room for 4 months. She had not raised the subject of what came next, and Victoria had not raised it either. And it had been fine, more than fine. It had been the first stable living situation Emma had experienced since she was 12 years old. And she had been careful not to look at it too directly, the way you don't look directly at certain lights because looking directly makes them disappear. But your own place, her name on a lease. You've been working on this, Emma said. Since October, Victoria said. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to. I didn't want you to be waiting for something that might not come through. But Judith thinks the application is strong. Emma was quiet for a long moment. She looked at her plate. She looked at the kitchen, Victoria's kitchen that had been her kitchen for 4 months, the table where she'd filled out the grant application, the counter where she made the coffee every morning at 6:45, the chair where she sat and had conversations she'd never expected to have with a person she'd never expected to know. I'm not in a hurry, she said carefully, to leave. This isn't something I need you to solve for me. Victoria looked at her directly. I know that. Then why? Because you deserve your own door, Victoria said simply. Not because I want you to go, because a person deserves a place that is theirs, that nobody can take from them, that has their name on it. She paused. I had to fight for mine once, a long time ago. I know what it means. Emma hadn't known that in all the conversations, and there had been many, long and winding and covering more territory than Emma had covered with any person in her life. Victoria hadn't said that. What happened? Emma asked. Victoria was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that was choosing, not avoiding. I was 26, she said. My husband at the time, he wasn't a good man. I left with nothing, literally nothing, a bag and a decision. She held Emma's gaze. Stone found me living in my car 3 weeks later. He'd known me since high school. He showed up at my window and said, Victoria, you're coming with me. And I said, I don't need charity. And he said, this isn't charity. This is a friend telling you to stop being stupid. A pause. He found me a place. He found me work. He did for me exactly what I've been trying to do for you. Emma stared at her. The chapter isn't about motorcycles, Victoria said quietly. It never was. Not for me. It's about people who decided that the people they claimed weren't going to be left alone in parking lots. That's all it ever was. The thing Emma had been carefully not looking at directly was now sitting in full light in the middle of the kitchen, and she found that it didn't disappear when she looked at it. It stayed. It was real, and it stayed. Okay, Emma said. Her voice came out thick. She cleared it. Apply for the housing. Let's try, Mama. Victoria picked up her fork. I already submitted the application, she said, last week. Emma looked at her. You already? I said it takes time. I wanted to start the clock. She met Emma's eyes with the completely unrepentant expression of a woman who has been making executive decisions on behalf of people she loved for 30 years and has never once been sorry about it. You can be annoyed with me. Emma opened her mouth, closed it. I'm not annoyed, she said. Good. She stopped. She found the word. I'm grateful. I'm really deeply, her throat closed. She pushed through it. I don't have words for what I am, Victoria. I've been looking for them for months, and I don't have them. Victoria looked at her for a long moment. You don't need words, she said finally. I can see it. I've been able to see it since that hospital room. She reached across the table and covered Emma's hand with hers. The same gesture she'd made lying in a hospital bed 4 months ago. The same warmth, the same unceremonious presence. That's enough. That's more than enough. Devin came back to the shop in February. He came back moving carefully, with instructions from his doctor that he followed for approximately 4 days before Cutter caught him doing something he shouldn't and had a conversation about it that Emma heard from across the shop floor. And that ended with Devin saying, I'm fine, and Cutter saying, you'll be fine when Dr. Okafor says you're fine, and not 1 day before. And if I catch you under another vehicle before then, I'll put you under it myself. Which was, Emma had come to understand, the local dialect for I was terrified when you were hurt, and I need you to take care of yourself. Devin appeared beside her bench on his first day back and stood there for a moment. Emma kept working. Hey, he said. Hey, she said. Cutter said you came to the hospital. Cutter talks too much. Cutter said you stayed most of the night. Emma set down her wrench. She turned and looked at Devin, who was standing with his hands in his pockets and the expression of someone who has been through something and is still processing what it changed. You told me something once, she said. That good starts out feeling like you made a mistake. I've been thinking about it since you said it. Devin looked at her. Yeah, it's true, she said. Everything good in my life right now started out feeling like I was making a mistake. She paused. So when I didn't know if you were going to be okay, I stayed. Because you're one of the good things, and I don't walk away from those anymore. Devin was quiet for a moment. His jaw worked slightly. He looked away, looked back. Okay, he said. His voice was rougher than usual. Okay, she agreed. He picked up a rag. He started working. Neither of them said anything else because nothing else needed to be said. And they both understood that, and that understanding, that shared fluency in the language of I care about you and words are insufficient, was itself a form of belonging that Emma would not have recognized 8 months ago and recognized completely now. Spring arrived, and with it, 2 things happened within the same week that Emma would later understand as the moment the shape of her life became clear to her. The first was a letter from the Housing Authority. It came on a Tuesday, addressed to Emma Collins at Victoria's address, in an official envelope that Emma held in both hands for a full 2 minutes before she opened it. Victoria was in the other room. Emma didn't call her. She opened it herself, standing in the hallway, and she read it twice, and then she stood with it against her chest and breathed. Approved. Move-in date, April 15th. A studio apartment on the 3rd floor of a building 4 blocks from the shop and 6 blocks from the college. Her name, Elise Adore. She walked into the other room where Victoria was reading and held out the letter without saying anything. Victoria read it. She set it down in her lap. She looked up at Emma with the face she made when things were exactly right. Not triumphant, not effusive, just deeply, solidly satisfied. The expression of a person whose faith in a particular outcome has been confirmed by reality. April 15th, Victoria said. April 15th, Emma said. Victoria stood up. She was moving well now, the splint long gone. The limp faded to something almost imperceptible that only showed when she was tired. She stood up and she pulled Emma into a proper embrace. Full arms, real hold, the kind that didn't ask permission and didn't need it. And Emma, who had been learning for months how to receive this, let herself be held. I'm proud of you, Victoria said. Emma's arms came up and held back. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Victoria already knew. The second thing happened 3 days later, on a Friday afternoon, at the end of the week's last class session with Dr. Wren. Dr. Wren kept her after again. This was becoming a pattern, and Emma had stopped trying to read it as either positive or negative, and had just started showing up to it the way she showed up to everything. Present, attentive, without preconceived conclusions. I submitted your work to the Departmental Review Board, Dr. Wren said. She said it the way she said most significant things, directly, without theatrical preamble. The independent problems I've been giving you, not as part of the standard curriculum. Emma frowned. You submitted my work. The review board has discretionary funds for students they identify as exceptional. Dr. Wren looked at her over the reading glasses. I identified you as exceptional. The word landed. Emma had been called a lot of things in her life. She had been called a problem, a case, a number on a list, a liability, an afterthought, invisible. She had been called homeless, a ward, a file, a placement. She had never in 20 years been called exceptional by someone who had the institutional authority to make that word mean something material. What does the review board do with that? Emma asked, and was quietly proud that her voice was steady. They've offered a scholarship, Dr. Wren said. It's modest, but it covers a year of full-time coursework at the university transfer level. Which means I wouldn't need the grant next year, Emma said. Her brain was already running the implications, the way it always did, numbers into futures. I could go full-time, The accelerated track gets me to transfer eligibility by December. By November, Dr. Wren corrected, if you continue at the current pace. Emma stared at her. I've been teaching mathematics for 22 years, Dr. Wren said. I've had perhaps 4 students with your intuitive relationship with numbers. Perhaps 4. She paused, deliberate. You belong in this field, Emma. I don't say that to students often. I say it to you completely. The classroom was quiet. Outside, the sounds of the campus, voices, footsteps, the ordinary music of people moving through an institution built for learning, continued without regard for what was happening inside this room. Emma thought about a 16-year-old girl who had thought about university and then locked that thought away in the category of things that were not for her. She thought about the precision of that lockup, how she'd done it cleanly without drama, the way you set down something too heavy and walk away from it because there's no sense in standing over a weight you can't carry. She'd walked away. And somehow, through a rainy night and a motorcycle crash, in an alley, in a jacket torn into bandages and words that lodged in a place she didn't have a name for, through all of it, she had walked in a full circle and come back to the things she'd set down. And it was still there. It had been waiting. Thank you, Emma said, and meant it in every register she had, not just for the scholarship, for the same seeing that Victoria had done in an alley, and Stone had done in a diner, and Cutter had done at a workbench, and Devon had done from a hospital bed, for the relentless, consistent, particular human act of looking at someone and seeing not what they'd been through, but what they were. Dr. Wren nodded once, efficiently, in the manner of a woman who accepts gratitude without requiring it to be performative. Applications for the fall semester close in 6 weeks, she said. I'll help you with the essay. Emma gathered her notebook. She stood. Dr. Wren, she said at the door, can I ask you something? You can ask. Why did you keep me after that first week? Why didn't you just accelerate the track without talking to me about it? Or submit the work to the review board without telling me? You could have just done it. Dr. Wren looked at her with a slight tilt of her head. Because it's your life, she said. Everything that happens in it should happen with you in the room. Emma stood in the doorway for a moment. Then she walked out into the spring afternoon and felt the sun on her face and felt the scholarship letter waiting in Dr. Wren's desk drawer and the housing letter in her jacket pocket and the knowledge that in 6 months she would be in a university mathematics program. And she felt all of it simultaneously, the weight and the lightness of it, the disbelief and the certainty, the long road and the place she was standing. And she did the thing she had been slowly, imperfectly, honestly learning to do. She let it be real, all of it, completely real. So, April 15th came. Emma's belongings fit in 3 boxes and a backpack, which meant the move took approximately 40 minutes, which Victoria called efficient, and Mama Lou called ridiculous, and Cutter called realistic, and Bricks didn't call anything because Bricks arrived at 8 in the morning with his truck and moved every box without comment and then stood in the middle of Emma's empty studio apartment and looked around with the expression of a man taking inventory and said, "Good bones." Emma looked at him. Is that a compliment? It's accurate, he said, and went back down for the last box. They filled the apartment with the things people brought. Victoria brought a kitchen table, not new, solid oak with 4 chairs and one wobble in the left rear leg that she said added character, and that Emma secretly suspected she'd fixed within the first hour of being left alone. Mama Lou brought cookware. Devin brought a rug he'd rolled up in the back of Cutter's truck, and that turned out to be improbably perfect for the space. Cutter brought light bulbs, all the right kinds, cool white in the kitchen and warm everywhere else. Because he was Cutter, and this was the specific language of his caring. Renata came. She stood in the doorway and looked at Emma in the middle of her new space surrounded by people, and she said, "You look different." "Different from when?" Emma asked. "From when I was following you." Emma thought about it. The girl moving through the city at calculated angles, changing direction to avoid observation, making herself hard to track. The girl who had perfected the science of not being seen. "I feel different," Emma said. Renata nodded slowly. "Good different." "Yeah," Emma said. "Good different." Stone came in the afternoon after most of the others had filtered out. He was always the last to arrive and the last to leave, as though he understood that spaces needed filling at different times and he was there to fill the last one. He brought a chair, a good one, leather and solid, that he set by the window without asking where she wanted it. He stood in the middle of her apartment and looked at her. "Victoria told me about the scholarship," he said. "She tells everyone everything," Emma said. "She tells the people who need to know." He held her gaze. "Emma, I want to say something and I want you to hear it without deflecting." She braced slightly, instinctively. Old habit. "Okay. What you did in that alley. It was not a small thing. I know you've said it was what anyone would have done. I know you believe that. But I need you to understand that it wasn't." He paused. "Victoria has been the center of what we've built here for 30 years. She has held more people together than I can count. She has shown up for people when nobody else would. He stopped. His jaw worked briefly, and Emma recognized the effort of a man keeping himself composed around something that had cost him genuine fear. "That night when I got the call, I thought I was going to lose her. I thought it was over. And it wasn't, because a 20-year-old girl with nothing stopped and stayed." He met her eyes. "You gave us our family back. Do you understand that?" Emma's throat was tight. "I understand it more than I did," she said. Stone nodded. "Good." He looked around the apartment again. At the table from Victoria, and the cookware from Mama Lou, and the rug from Devin, and the light bulbs from Cutter, and the chair he'd just put by the window. "You know what this is?" he said. Emma looked at the apartment, her name on the lease, her door, her window, her specific light. "A start," she said. Stone shook his head. "It's a family furnishing a home," he said. "That's what this is." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at everything in the room. Everything brought by specific hands belonging to specific people, each object carrying the warmth of its giver. And she understood something she'd been approaching from the outside for 8 months, and had now finally completely arrived at. This was what it felt like to be inside something, not surviving outside it, not watching through glass, not calculating the distance from where you stood to where warmth was. Inside it, the warmth moving in both directions, her giving and being given to, simultaneously, continuously, without transaction or condition. This was what she had saved that night in the alley. Not just Victoria's life. She had saved her own way back to this room, to these people, to this version of herself that she hadn't known existed, that had been waiting underneath the survival, underneath the calculation, underneath 4 years of perfect, precise, heartbreaking invisibility. She had been found, not by the Hells Angels, not by Victoria or Stone or Cutter or Mama Lou. She had been found by herself. They had simply been the people who showed up while it was happening. 6 months later, Emma Collins walked into the mathematics department at the University of Washington on the first day of the fall semester. She was carrying a new backpack. Proper, structured, not the worn thing she'd had strapped to both shoulders through 4 years of loading docks and shelter floors. She had her student ID in her pocket, her name printed clearly on it, her photo in the center, the university's seal in the corner. She had a class schedule and a campus map she'd already memorized because she'd been given it 3 weeks ago, and she remembered everything. She stopped in the hallway outside her first class. Around her, students moved with the particular organized chaos of the first day of semester, talking, consulting phones, navigating, existing in the easy assumption that they belonged here. Emma stood still in the middle of it and felt the old instinct try to fire. The one that said, "You're not this kind of person. This isn't the kind of place for you. You are nobody, and this is somewhere, and the two things don't fit." She let the instinct run. Then she walked into the classroom and sat down in the third row and put her notebook on the desk and her pen beside it. And she thought about Victoria saying, "You are not nobody," in an alley in the rain. And she thought about all the mornings since that had proved it, one at a time, one cup of coffee at a time, one equation at a time, one person at a time. She thought about the girl she'd been. That girl had been real. She didn't erase her. She didn't look back on her with shame or pity. She looked back on her the way you look at someone who has carried something impossibly heavy for an impossibly long time, with recognition and respect. That girl had survived. She had kept herself intact through things that would have broken someone who didn't understand what was worth protecting. She had carried herself all the way to an alley in the rain and made one decision, one single turn towards someone who needed help. And that decision had changed the geometry of everything. She had not saved a stranger that night. She had opened a door. She had walked through it. And on the other side was this: a seat in a university classroom, a name on a lease, a family that had been built out of choice instead of blood and was no less real for that, a life that was hers entirely and completely and irrevocably hers, because she had stopped and stayed and refused to walk past the moment that mattered. The professor came in. The class settled. Equations appeared on the board, clean and precise, and full of the particular beauty that Emma had always been able to see in them. The beauty of things that were exactly what they were, no more, no less, true in every direction you looked at them. Emma picked up her pen. She wrote the date at the top of the page. She underlined it. She didn't look back again. Not because the past didn't matter. It did, all of it. Every cold floor and empty shelter and calculated distance and closed door. It mattered because it was real and she had lived it, and it was the road that had brought her here. But roads are for walking, not for standing on, and Emma Collins was done standing still. She had places to go. She had a name. She had a door. She had people who knew it and used it and meant it when they said it. She had work that demanded the best of her hands and study that demanded the best of her mind. In a family, improbable, leather-jacketed, cornbread-carrying, sideways complimenting, motorcycle riding, completely real, that demanded the best of her heart. She had been the girl nobody saw. Now she was the girl who saw herself. And that specific, hard-won, completely ordinary miracle was the only